The moment her lips moved in the dark, I knew. It wasn't the first time, but it felt different. There was something about the way she whispered that name, barely audible yet so crystal clear, that struck a chord deep within me. No, I thought, my chest tightening as I strained to hear the words again, but it was already too late. Her voice was soft, almost gentle as she said it, "Ethan." I froze. The silence in the room felt suffocating, pressing in on me, making it hard to breathe. Her body was curled up next to mine, the warmth of her skin still fresh against mine. The rhythmic rise and fall of her chest told me she was deep in sleep, but my mind was wide awake, wide open, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. Ethan. My name wasn't even close. There was no mistake here. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It wasn't the vague mumbling that usually accompanied a restless night. It wasn't a bad dream or some forgotten memory trying to force its way into the present. No. Her breath had been steady, almost rhythmic, before she let that name slip free, and in that instant, everything changed. The room, once filled with the comforting silence of two bodies sharing space, now felt like a foreign place, cold, hollow, like the walls were closing in on me. I tried to shake off the feeling, convinced it was just a random moment, a meaningless thing that would pass when morning came, but deep down, something told me it wasn't. It wasn't just a dream. I stared at her as she lay beside me, her features softened by the pale glow of the moonlight streaming in from the window. Her hair was tangled across the pillow, her lips slightly parted, her brow relaxed. For a brief second, I almost convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, I had misheard. But the name Ethan echoed through my mind like a sharp, painful reminder that this was something deeper than just a passing slip. I thought about the days leading up to this. The sudden distance I'd felt between us. The little things that felt off, the subtle changes that made me question whether we were still on the same page. I hadn't said anything, hadn't even allowed myself to acknowledge those thoughts, but they were there, crawling through my mind like slow-burning embers, flickering beneath the surface. And now this. Her body shifted next to mine, her hand brushing against my arm in a soft, subconscious gesture of intimacy. I had to remind myself that this wasn't about me. This wasn't about my insecurities or my gut reaction. This was about her. Who was Ethan? And why had she called out his name in her sleep? I didn't know if I wanted to know the answer, but I knew I had to find out. The nagging voice in the back of my head told me that I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't just let it go. The bond we had, the life we'd built together, was all too fragile to leave these things unsaid, unaddressed. And now, with that name hanging in the air between us, I knew the only way to move forward was to face whatever this was head on. But where did I even begin? I wanted to shake her awake, demand an answer, but I knew it wasn't that simple. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, heavier than anything I'd ever felt before. To confront her now, to ask, would be to admit that something was broken, that our relationship wasn't as solid as I'd once thought. I wasn't ready for that, not yet. Instead, I held my breath, waiting for the next few moments to unfold in their usual way. I had to believe that it was just a dream. That it was nothing more than a fleeting moment of confusion, a misfire in the brain while she slept. But the longer I stared at her, the more that name echoed in my mind. I couldn't help but replay it over and over in my head, like a song that wouldn't stop playing. Ethan. 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 Why did I feel like this wasn't a random slip? Why did it feel so real? The more I thought about it, the more my mind conjured up worst-case scenarios. I had always been a bit paranoid, a bit too introspective for my own good, but this was different. This wasn't just about a passing thought. It was about a name, a person, someone that, for all I knew, was a part of her life that I had never seen before. Someone who seemed to slip through the cracks when I wasn't looking. The idea unsettled me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 2 in the morning. The house was still, quiet. The only sound was her soft breathing, the gentle pulse of life that somehow felt alien to me now. I could feel the sweat beginning to form on my palms, the air suddenly feeling much too warm. Ethan. I had never heard the name before. Not once. Not in casual conversation, not in passing. We had never talked about an Ethan. But it was a name I couldn't forget, no matter how hard I tried. In the silence, I reached over and gently brushed a strand of her hair away from her face, my fingers lingering a little longer than they should have. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something was wrong. Something was different now. What did this mean for us? For me? I wasn't ready to face it, but I knew this couldn't just slide by. The thought gnawed at me, pushing me further into a quiet storm of doubt. The last thing I wanted to do was accuse her of something she hadn't done, but the gut feeling I had told me that I wasn't overreacting. I had felt it before, this itch beneath the surface, this instinct that told me when something wasn't quite right. But what if I was wrong? I glanced back at her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, her body still nestled against mine. I wanted to believe that this was just a blip, that it didn't mean anything, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was already too far down the rabbit hole to turn back. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I could trust my own instincts. I spent the next few days pretending nothing had changed. It wasn't easy, but I kept my distance, pushing the uneasy feeling to the back of my mind, as if I could will it to disappear. When we ate dinner together, I smiled at her, laughed at her jokes, ran my fingers through her hair like I always did when we sat on the couch. She never knew that inside, I was unraveling. The name Ethan echoed in every room, every moment. It was there when we watched TV, when we cooked dinner, when we lay in bed, pretending to sleep. But I couldn't ignore the pull. The nagging ache in my chest that reminded me every time I looked at her that something wasn't quite right. Something was missing, and I needed to know what it was. That morning, I woke up early for no reason, a habit I had long since outgrown. The sun wasn't even up, but my mind refused to rest. I lay there for a long time, watching her sleep, her face soft in the morning light. It had been weeks since I had really looked at her like this, without distractions, without the layers of our routine getting in the way. Her peaceful expression made the storm brewing inside me feel like an invasion. I slid out of bed as quietly as possible, not wanting to wake her. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen as I tried to focus. The name Ethan wouldn't let me go. It was almost like a dark cloud hanging over my thoughts, pulling at the corners of my mind. I didn't even know where to begin looking for answers. I typed the name into a search engine, then quickly erased it. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to go down that path of suspicion and paranoia. But I couldn't help it. I needed something, anything, to calm the storm in my chest. I turned my phone off and left it on the table as I walked outside, trying to clear my head. The cool morning air hit my face, a sharp contrast to the heat that had consumed me for days. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady my breathing, to feel grounded again. I needed to focus. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face as she called out that name. Ethan. Her voice, so soft, so intimate. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow missed something. Maybe it wasn't just a passing moment. Maybe it was a revelation. Maybe it was her subconscious telling me things I wasn't ready to hear. When I returned inside, she was awake. Her back was turned to me as she made coffee in the kitchen. The rhythmic clinking of mugs, the hiss of the espresso machine, were the only sounds filling the room. But something was different about her today. She moved slower, her shoulders slightly hunched as if she were carrying some invisible weight. I wanted to ask her about it, but I held back. I didn't want to confront her yet. Instead, I walked up behind her and kissed her on the neck, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, an odd mix of lavender and citrus, something she had worn for as long as I could remember. It was comforting, but it didn't seem to help this time. It wasn't enough to erase the feeling in my gut, the nagging worry. She didn't turn around immediately, which wasn't unusual. She usually took her time in the mornings, moving at her own pace. But today, she hesitated before responding, her shoulders tensing as if she were bracing for something. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," she replied softly, her voice distant. Too distant. I watched her as she prepared her coffee, not sure how to bridge the gap between us. I had no idea what to say. The usual small talk felt hollow, like we were pretending to be normal while something important hung in the air. The silence stretched on until she finally turned to face me, her eyes soft but unreadable. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm going to be late for work," she said, glancing at the clock. "I'll be back late tonight." "Okay," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. "See you later." She kissed me quickly, her lips brushing mine in a gesture that should have been comforting. But it wasn't. It felt like she was just going through the motions. As if this moment, this kiss, was just another part of the routine, something she had to do before leaving. I watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her, and the silence settled back over the house. For the first time in days, I felt completely alone. I spent the next few hours pacing the house, trying to focus on anything but the thoughts swirling around in my head. I should have been working. I should have been reading, or writing, or doing something productive. But all I could think about was Ethan. I decided to take action. I needed to know. I had to. The name she had whispered in her sleep, it had to mean something. But what? I wasn't stupid enough to think I could just ask her about it. Not yet. She wasn't ready for that conversation, and neither was I. The fact that it had even crossed my mind felt like a betrayal. But I couldn't stop myself from feeling it. The thought that she might have been keeping something from me. Something important. Something painful. I took a deep breath and grabbed my phone again. My hands shook slightly as I typed out a message, one that I had been avoiding for far too long. Do you know anyone named Ethan? I stared at the words, my heart hammering in my chest. I almost hit send, but then I hesitated. What would she say? Would she lie? Would she tell me the truth? Could I even handle the truth? I didn't send the message. Instead, I turned off my phone and tossed it on the counter. The silence enveloped me again. I had no answers. No clear direction. All I had was a gut feeling, a feeling that was growing stronger every day. And I knew that I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was off. Something had changed. And sooner or later, I would have to confront it. I just didn't know if I was ready. The days blurred together after that morning. I went through the motions of life, pretending everything was fine, even when my mind felt like it was on fire. Each time I tried to distract myself, I was haunted by the same thought. What if she's lying to me? What if the name Ethan wasn't just a slip of the tongue but a symbol of something far deeper? It was like a piece of glass lodged under my skin, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it hurt more each day. It was during one of these moments of forced normalcy that I found myself in our living room, scrolling through the endless list of social media posts, trying to numb the ache inside. I'd been avoiding her calls all morning, pretending I was busy with work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her, her smile, her laugh, the way she had looked at me in the kitchen that morning. But the more I tried to think of something else, the clearer it became. I couldn't pretend anymore. I needed answers. I needed closure. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a notification. I didn't even have to check it to know it was from her. I could feel her presence in the air, like a weight pressing down on me. I ignored the message at first, knowing that reading it would only make the pit in my stomach grow. But I couldn't stop myself. I opened the text. Hey, I know you're busy, but when you get a chance, can you meet me at the cafe near work? I want to talk about something. Talk about something. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart pounded in my chest as I reread the message several times. I wasn't ready for this conversation. But I had no choice now. She was pulling me in whether I wanted to face the truth or not. I grabbed my jacket, checked the time, and left. The cool air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it wasn't enough to cool the heat in my chest. I drove to the cafe, my fingers tight around the steering wheel. My mind raced with possibilities, each more frightening than the last. What was she going to say? What was she going to tell me? By the time I arrived, I felt like I had already been through the conversation in my head 100 times. And none of those scenarios ended well. I parked the car and walked toward the cafe, the door swinging open with a soft chime. She was sitting at a small table in the corner, her eyes scanning the menu even though she had no intention of ordering. Her usual upbeat demeanor was gone, replaced with something quieter, more reserved. I could tell something was wrong before I even said a word. I walked up to the table and sat down across from her. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. The world outside the cafe window seemed distant, like a dream I couldn't quite wake up from. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Something that's been on my mind for a while. My stomach dropped. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. What is it? She hesitated, her fingers playing with the edge of her cup. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to tell me something, but she wasn't sure how to start. I almost wished she would just say it, whatever it was, because the waiting was killing me. I've been keeping something from you, she said, her words slow and deliberate. I never wanted to hurt you, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this from you. My heart was beating in my throat now. I felt lightheaded, the edges of my vision blurring as the world shrank to just the two of us sitting at this table. I don't know how to explain it, she continued, her eyes not meeting mine. But a while ago, I met someone. Someone who made me feel things I haven't felt in a long time. The words hit me like a slap across the face. Someone. Her voice wavered, the words almost foreign to me. Someone? A person she hadn't mentioned before? Someone she hadn't even hinted at in passing? I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I wanted to scream at her, demand to know who this person was. But something in her eyes, something vulnerable, raw, stopped me. She wasn't telling me this to hurt me. She was telling me because she didn't know what else to do. I'm so sorry, she said quietly, her voice breaking. I never meant for it to get this far. I never meant to hurt you. But I can't stop thinking about him. And I don't know what that means for us. The weight of her words settled over me, crushing the air from my lungs. The silence between us felt suffocating, like I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She had been seeing someone else behind my back. The idea felt absurd, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. This was my life, my relationship. I trusted her. I believed in us. And now, all of that was in question. But there was something else, something that gnawed at the edges of my mind. She said she hadn't meant for it to get this far, but her words didn't add up. There had to be more. She was holding back. Who is he? I asked, my voice strained. She hesitated again, her gaze flicking toward the door as if she were looking for a way out. His name's Ethan. The name that had been echoing in my head for days. Ethan. I knew it. The pieces clicked together, but it still didn't make sense. How long? I asked, the words barely leaving my mouth before I could stop them. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to know the answer. But I had to. About 3 months, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 months. 3 months of betrayal, 3 months of lies. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. The person I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted, was keeping secrets from me. And worse, she had been seeing someone else while I was right beside her. The realization was suffocating. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady myself, to keep my breathing calm. My whole body was shaking. I didn't know what to feel anymore. Anger. Hurt. Confusion. All of them tangled together in a mess I couldn't untangle. I never wanted this, she said, her eyes welling with tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could keep it from you. But I can't. I can't lie to you anymore. I didn't say anything for a long time. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat, too heavy to speak. There was nothing left to say. The damage was done. But I didn't leave. I stayed there, locked in the silence with her. Not because I knew how to fix things, but because I didn't know how to walk away. The air between us was thick. Each breath felt heavier than the last, every second stretching on like a lifetime. My mind raced in 1,000 directions, but the same 2 thoughts kept repeating. She lied to me. She lied to me for months. Every part of me wanted to stand up, walk away, scream until my throat was raw. But I couldn't. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't escape this suffocating feeling that seemed to have taken over every inch of my being. Her confession was still fresh, her words still echoing in my ears. 3 months. Ethan. The name seemed to taunt me with every beat of my heart. The worst part was how she said it. Like it meant something, like it mattered more than anything I could have offered. Her voice was fragile now, hesitant, but the damage had already been done. I didn't want to hurt you, she repeated softly, her voice trembling. I thought I could fix it, thought it would go away, but it didn't. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to hear from her anymore. Sorry? No. It didn't feel like enough. It could never be enough. The hurt was too deep, too raw. Is he the reason you've been distant? I managed to ask, the words falling out of my mouth almost mechanically, as if I had no control over them. Is he the reason you've been pulling away? Her eyes shifted to the floor, and she nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I hated seeing her cry. I hated how much I still cared. I hated how much I wanted to comfort her despite everything she'd done. But I knew deep down that comfort wasn't what she deserved. Not right now. Not after this. It started out small, she whispered. Just texting, talking. I didn't think it would mean anything, but it did. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't stop. I didn't want to lose you, but I didn't know how to stop it either. I didn't know how to stop it either. The phrase haunted me, rattled me to my core. Because it wasn't just the affair she was confessing to. It was the emotional abandonment, the slow erosion of everything we had built together, piece by piece. She had chosen him. She had chosen to nurture that connection instead of the one we had. And for what? The novelty of something new? The excitement of the forbidden? It was all too much. The words, the betrayal, the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare that felt all too real. I couldn't process it all at once. My brain kept circling back to the same question, the one I couldn't let go of: why Ethan? The name, the one she had mentioned so casually, the one that had haunted me for days, echoed louder now in my mind. I couldn't help but wonder if it had been more than just physical. Was it emotional? Had she given him pieces of herself she hadn't given me? I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table as I forced myself to look her in the eye. What was he to you? My voice cracked on the words, betraying the calm I was desperately trying to hold on to. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice faltered. She swallowed hard, and then, quietly, almost as if she was speaking to herself, she said, "He was everything I needed at that moment." The air in the room felt even heavier, suffocating in a way that made it hard to breathe. Everything I needed. The word stung like salt in a wound, burning and raw, scraping at my insides. I had been the one there for her when she needed someone. I had been the one who had been there for years, offering everything I had, my time, my loyalty, my love. And now, this man had somehow become everything she needed. "Why didn't you talk to me?" I asked, the question a whisper that barely made it past my lips. "Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy? You could have come to me. We could have worked through this together." She hesitated, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. "I thought I was. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel like I couldn't reach you anymore. Like I wasn't enough. And then he came along, and it felt like I mattered. It felt like someone saw me again. Like someone wanted me. And I couldn't stop it." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't that she didn't love me, it was that she had stopped trusting me. She had stopped believing that I could be her partner, that I could be the person who saw her. And so, when someone else gave her that validation, that feeling of being wanted, she grabbed onto it. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. I felt the sting of tears behind my lids but pushed them back. I wouldn't cry. I couldn't. Not yet. I had to hold it together. I had to find some way to take control of this mess. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice steady despite everything inside me wanting to shatter. "What do we do? Where do we go from here?" She wiped her eyes, looking more fragile than I had ever seen her. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together on the table. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I don't know if we can go back to what we were. I don't know if I can ever make it right again." I looked at her, this woman I had shared my life with, this woman I had trusted, loved, believed in, and I felt my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. There was no going back. There was no undoing what had been done. No way to make the cracks disappear, no way to patch up the wounds that had been carved so deeply into my soul. The love we had once shared now felt like a distant memory, a fairy tale that had been ripped apart by the harsh reality of betrayal. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. But I did know one thing: I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies. "I need time," I said finally, my voice steady despite the weight in my chest. "I need space to figure out what I want. What this all means for me. For us." She nodded, her face pale and full of regret. "I understand. And I'll give you all the time you need. But please know that I am so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." The silence that followed felt like a suffocating presence, one that seemed to stretch on forever. And though we were still sitting at the same table, though she was still across from me, I felt further away from her than I ever had before. She had crossed a line that could never be erased. But in that moment, I realized that the hardest part of all wasn't just the betrayal, it was the uncertainty. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if there was a chance for us to heal. All I knew was that this chapter of my life had ended, and what came next, whether with her or without her, would be a new beginning. But first, I needed to breathe. I needed to find myself again. And I wasn't sure if that meant being with her or walking away. The following days were an agonizing blur, a constant back and forth of confusion and pain. My mind was a battleground, torn between the man I had been and the person I was forced to become in the wake of her betrayal. The love I had for her, the trust one had so willingly given, felt like a fragile thread that had been severed by the weight of her secret. Each time I saw her, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Each time she spoke, I could hear his name reverberating in my head. The hardest part wasn't the revelation itself, it was the aftermath. The reality that everything had changed. We couldn't go back to how we were, no matter how hard we tried. And she knew it. I knew it. It was the finality of it that kept me awake at night. How do you rebuild something when the foundation has been cracked, when the person you loved has shattered the very trust that held everything together? She spent the first few days apologizing, trying to convince me that she was truly sorry, that she regretted everything. But I had stopped listening to her words. They no longer had the power to soothe or heal. They were just words. Empty. Meaningless. Because nothing she said could change what had already been done. We spent hours talking. But even the silence between us felt like a conversation in itself, a conversation filled with questions that had no answers. Why had she done it? Was it a mistake? Or had it been something deeper, something she had kept hidden even from herself? I couldn't get any clarity from her. Her words were nothing but apologies, but I couldn't stop asking myself if they were genuine or just the result of guilt and fear. Fear of losing me. Fear of facing the consequences of her actions. It wasn't just the betrayal that gnawed at me, it was the realization that our relationship had been a lie, at least in part. I thought I knew her. I thought I understood who she was, what she wanted, what we were building together. But now, I wasn't so sure. I didn't even know if she had ever fully loved me, or if I was just a safe, convenient option while she searched for something else in the arms of someone else. Her need for someone else's validation wasn't just a crack in our relationship, it was a symptom of something much deeper, something that I didn't think I could fix. I am not enough. That was the message she had sent, loud and clear. And no matter how many times she told me she was sorry, I couldn't escape that truth. One night, after a particularly difficult conversation, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed, my head in my hands. The room was dark, but I could still see the shadow of her in the doorway, standing there, waiting for me to say something, anything. She hadn't spoken in hours, and neither had I. We had both reached a point where the words felt useless. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly, not looking at her. The words were painful to say. They felt like a heavy weight in my chest, but they were the truth. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, not because I didn't love her, but because something inside me had broken, something that couldn't be fixed by just saying the right things. She stepped into the room, slowly, like she was afraid of what I might say next. I don't expect you to forgive me right now, she said softly, her voice breaking. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. From the bottom of my heart. I would give anything to go back and undo it. I turned to look at her then. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from the endless tears. She looked so small, so fragile, and in that moment, I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to make everything go away. But the truth was, I couldn't. I couldn't pretend it didn't hurt. I couldn't erase the image of her in Ethan's arms, couldn't forget the thought that she had given him a piece of herself that should have been mine. I don't think you can undo it, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. You can't take it back. You can't just erase what you did. What he did to us. She closed her eyes as if the words physically struck her. I could see the guilt washing over her, the pain she was feeling, but I didn't know if it was enough. Was it enough to make up for what she had done? To make up for the months of lies, the betrayal that had carved its way through my heart like a wound that wouldn't heal? The silence stretched between us again, thick and suffocating, before she spoke again. Do you still love me? Her voice was trembling now, the uncertainty lacing her words like poison. She was asking for reassurance, but the truth was, I didn't know anymore. Could love survive this? Could we rebuild something from the ashes of what we had? Or was it better to walk away, to end it here and move on? The question hung in the air, suspended, and I found myself unsure of my own feelings. I had loved her with everything I had. I had trusted her with pieces of myself that no one else would ever see. And now, I didn't know if I could trust her again. I don't know, I replied honestly. I don't know if I can keep loving someone who doesn't trust me enough to be honest. She nodded, as though she had already known that answer. She was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the floor. Then, when she finally spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I can't blame you for that. I've broken something that can't be fixed, not by words, not by anything. I ruined us. And for the first time since this nightmare had started, I felt the urge to comfort her, to hold her and tell her everything would be okay. But I stopped myself. Because it wasn't okay. And it wouldn't be. Not right now. Maybe not ever. I think we need time apart, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. It felt like the hardest decision I'd ever made, but it was the only one that made sense. She nodded again, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I understand. If that's what you need. I need space to think, to heal, to figure out if we even have a chance. My voice faltered, and I realized I was shaking too. I can't just pretend everything is fine when it's not. I need to figure out what comes next, whether that's with you, or without you. I stood up then, my knees weak, and walked towards the door. I couldn't look at her anymore, not like this. Not when everything had changed. I'll be staying with a friend for a while, I said, my voice hoarse. I'll get my things in the morning. She didn't stop me. She didn't even try. She just nodded and wiped away the last of her tears. And as I left, I felt the weight of what I was walking away from. But at the same time, I felt like I was finally walking toward something that would help me heal. Whether it was how or not, I didn't know. But I had to figure that out. I had to figure out who I was now, who we were, and if there was a future for us at all.